Well, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. My name is Keith, and this is Ryne. And today we're going to be talking about why don't more ministries succeed when they're short-staffed. So stay tuned for today's episode. Okay, so Ryne, today we're addressing the topic that is pretty common in youth ministries around the country. We have a shortage of leaders. We have a shortage of youth pastors. Maybe there's people that are watching or listening today that they're not even paid staff on their church. Maybe they're in a volunteer role, or maybe they're part-time or bivocational. There's lots of different scenarios where we can all say that we're maybe short-staffed in our ministry, whether that's hired staff or paid staff or volunteers or leaders or whatever you want to call them. But when it comes to our experiences, do you feel like you are in this position right now? So just so we can clear the air, because we both work at churches, we both are paid by churches, but do you feel like you are understaffed when it comes to adult leaders right now in your ministry?
Yes, in a sense that we were definitely, so just full transparency, we have about one volunteer for every 12 or 13 kids in our ministry right now, in terms of regular attenders, not all the same night. But the nice part is they're committed every single time we meet. So I don't have a rotation basis, but we're feeling the time crunch of okay, if we're going to replicate kids, we got to replicate leaders. So yeah, we're kind of on that edge of every year, if we don't keep up, we're very clearly going to be passed up.
And this is something that we talked about before, where you've had a strong kind of standard for the leaders that serve in your ministry, that you mainly focus on couples, right? That you have a husband and wife that serve together in your ministry. And we talked about this because you've experienced a lot of growth in the past year in your student ministry. How many students have come to Christ as a result of your ministry this past year?
In the past, soon to be 12 months, I think it's 84 students have trusted Christ.
Yeah. So inevitably, even if not all of them stick around, that's an increase of just people in the room. I mean, we're talking a lot of what we call new conversion growth. And so because of that, and this is what I recommended to you when we were talking about it. I was like, you might need to lower the standard of having a married couple serve together, because that opens up the door for other people, to serve in different capacities. And there's great reasons, and that's worked out for you well, up until this point. But so a ratio that you have now is about 1 to 12, 1 to 13.
I think off the top of my head, yeah.
Okay, so this brings up the question: what is an ideal ratio?
I don't know. That's what I was wondering. I think it depends on how high capacity your leaders are. For us, that's not an issue, because all of our leaders are trusted and vetted and committed to where it's I don't have to supervise. You show up, we all do it, and then if you need anything from me, you let me know. So I think it's ministry dependent, but even camp. I was talking with you, and I think you guys have 1 to.
You usually do 1 to 5 or 1 to 6.
Yeah.
But so we have some policies in place though, where we have to have 2 adults. When there's
in a cabin,
in a cabin and everything.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, when you think of even school teachers, sometimes you have 1 to 30.
That's what my dad's I've been 1 to 120 before in a gym, so I can run you
and
through.
So of course that's not ideal when you're talking about discipleship, relationships, and all that stuff. But then we look at, okay, what was the ultimate example? Jesus. 1 to 12.
Yep.
Seems pretty reasonable. Of course, he had larger groups at different times, but as far as his group, and then he had kind of 3 within that he focused on. So I would say a healthy minimum would be 1 to 12.
Yeah. And
then if you can have more adults to students, less than that, 1 to 8, 1 to 6 or something, then that'd be even better. But we can't say that 1 to 12 is too little, because that's what Jesus did. Yeah. So when it comes to that, I think that's a good goal. I would say in our ministry right now, we functionally, we're okay on adult leaders. We can use more, but as far as a ratio like that, I think there's some things that we're moving out or rolling out in the next a few months that I think we're going to be requiring more leaders.
Yeah.
And then also just to kind of because we have a core group of leaders that invest in students in what we call midweek or our small groups. And then we have, auxiliary leaders that kind of, on a rotation, or maybe for special events, or, if we need people to serve in camp capacity, then we can kind of call upon them, but they're not regularly weekly volunteers. So I think there's kind of layers of commitment that we have within our ministry that helps focus that. So when it comes to even just, measuring what is short-staffed, I would say, would you agree if you have a higher ratio than 1 to 12, if you go up to 113, 140, and that doesn't mean 1 week you have 14 students and 1 leader.
Yeah.
Does that mean that, it's you need to rechange your whole strategy and recruit tons of leaders, but if it's consistently more than 1 to 12, I think there might be a short staff there.
Yeah.
Now, the title of this podcast is why don't more ministries succeed when they're short staffed? Because I think we can all agree that we would love to have more people to invest in students.
Yeah.
But what we're really tackling today is what are some reasons why more ministries don't succeed? Why don't ministries succeed when they have less than ideal ratios? And we've learned a lot about this because, there's been seasons, even though I wouldn't say we're short staffed as far as like leaders. And I can tell you kind of why we were talking about this before we started, that we have, I have a mentality for this where if you evaluate what you can do ministry wise based on how many leaders you currently have, then I don't think you have a bold enough vision. So my mentality, and this has worked for the past 16 years that I've been, involved in student ministry at this church. I have, I was like, what does the Lord want us to do? And then I recruit towards that instead of saying, how many leaders do we have? This is what the Lord wants us to do. And of course you don't want to be irresponsible with that. It's not like you're going to say like, all right, I'm going to take, 1,000 kids to camp, but we only have 5 leaders. Let's do this. Like, you still want to be responsible, but the Lord has been faithful when we've stepped out in faith and we said, hey, this is the vision that we feel like God's given us to reach this many students. How many leaders do we need to accomplish that? And we reverse engineer that, and then we recruit. And I've found that actually brings people out of the woodwork because no leader wants to serve if they don't feel like they're needed. Yeah. Especially a quality leader. It's like where they just feel like a warm body in the room. They're like, why am I here? So everybody's time is valuable, and you want to make sure that you're giving them, a very valuable part of the ministry. And so when it comes to reasons why ministries succeed or don't succeed when they're short staffed, what are some things that come to the top of your mind?
I think first is some of it is just the mentality of like, well, we are short staffed, so we can't do that, or we can't do this, or we've had conversations before about like burnout versus rust out, and I know you said like either way you're out. Yeah. But I saw somebody talking today about it's like, do we are we so focused on Sabbath and resting that we've lost kind of the Jesus went to bed exhausted every day, but he woke up in the morning and spent time. So I think one is just that kind of that vision of like mentality is your vision big enough and bold enough to say, even when times where you're struggling and you're tired and you feel like I'm at my wit's end, which we've all been there before, we've all had that drive home from youth group, do you come back to like God is bigger? So like it doesn't matter my capacity, it doesn't matter how many leaders we have, it doesn't matter how many volunteers we have. It's like God is bigger than all of this, and so he wants his kingdom to grow, and so if that's what he wants, he's going to take care of it, and I need to find his will for me and playing that role. So I think the first thing is just kind of that identity of like seeing where we are and being able to look past that and say, okay, if God is faithful to bring the harvest, he's going to bring the workers. He tells us to pray for the workers. So, it's there. I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is I think we're quick to delegate the things that we shouldn't, in the sense that we've had this conversation. Many people give away the thing that matters most, which is the teaching of the word. And so when we're stressed and overwhelmed, I've done this before. It's like, I've got a really busy week. It's like, let me find a video that I think I could play that would take place at the lesson, because I just don't have time this week. And now I'm in the mindset of like, okay, hold on, time out. Like, while videos are good and we supplement, and of course if somebody's saying something much better than I can that I think will connect with our kids, I'm going to use that. But now it's like, okay, hold on. When you look at the apostles' duties, it was the preaching and teaching of the word.
Acts 6:4.
Yep. And so it's like that should be what we focus on. And I know for us, in 2022, we were doing a lot of events because we were trying to grow the youth group. I mean, when I came on board, I think the year before I came on board, the first Wednesday night they had 2 kids, and so I
didn't realize that.
Yep. And so it's like, well, how do we grow it? Well, I mean, what does every kid want to be a part of? Well, they want to have games, they want to have food, and so we kind of did that route, and eventually, through meeting you and through being introduced to gospel advancing values, I realized I was like, okay, hold on, we can. I told people this. I was like, look, we could have. You want me to have 200 kids here? Like, I can get 200 kids here. It's not going to be cheap. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on, but it's like, but for what? Like, what's the purpose? What's the end goal? And so when we kind of said, hey, instead of focusing on activities and filling up a calendar, we're going to be focused on making disciples. And so we actually cut back a ton of activities. And my first thought was like, oh man, like this is going to hurt us. Like, we're going to suffer because of this. And really that's when the switch flipped. And that's when really students started making disciples because they realized we're not here for the activities. We're not here for what the next thing is going to be. We're here because we love Jesus and we want to share that message with others.
Yeah.
So I think having that mentality, I think focusing on what they need to focusing on. And then 3, I think setting realistic expectations. Okay. God can do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine.
Yep.
I shared this quote, I think, in the last podcast of God can do in moments of favor what we can't do in lifetimes of labor. But I think sometimes setting that kind of expectation.
That was Yuri, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yuri. That was kind of helpful for me to be like, I don't have to do everything. Like I can let that go. And the way that I'm going to hurt myself is if I try and do everything, if I keep trying to run with all of this, what got us here isn't going to get us to the next thing. I remember my pastor saying that. It's like, look, what got us to this point is not going to get us to the next point. And so what are we doing that God wants to change, that he wants to do? And sometimes that means taking a step back in some areas so that other areas can come forward. So I think the mentality, I think the vision, I think ourselves, the limitations we put on ourselves and the limitations we put on God. I think that's why a lot of churches and a lot of youth groups and you know, a lot of youth pastors and leaders can get stuck in that. We just can't do that. It's just not possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll share a story that it kind of helped me to learn, and it wasn't like intentionally. And I was like, well, I'm going to learn this lesson, but the Lord really showed me a lot during the season. So before I came on staff with McLean years ago, I was at a small church plant, and we had, you know, just a small youth group. I came on part-time at first. I was working another job, and then they brought me on full-time with the hopes that like they would be able to afford to continue to pay me full-time as the church grew. And I was part-time for about 6 months, and then I came on full-time. In about a year, they came back to me and said, hey, we can't afford to pay you anymore. And so I was like, but things were, you know, going well. Like, you know, things were growing kind of steadily, but not like, you know, crazy rapidly growth or anything. And so I was like, well, I can't just like not have a job. Like, you know, like I can't like just, you know, hope that the Lord, you know, I mean, I did hope that the Lord would provide, and he did through another job. And so I started working another job, which mainly I had to divide my attention to where I had to, you know, obviously provide, you know, for my family, but then work as a youth pastor part-time if there's ever such thing. But I was literally just physically not able to give the same amount of time that I was when I was full-time. And what was crazy is during those 6 months, I stayed another 6 months part-time. During those 6 months, the youth ministry almost tripled in size. Like it was like we were reaching new students. Like they were, you know, and I think what happened was, or not, I believe what happened was that because I couldn't do everything, people had more ownership in the ministry, and they saw it as like their responsibility, not just, oh, that's the youth pastor's responsibility. And so all that to say is I learned an important lesson is that if you are doing everything, so like I had to dial it back to where I could only do a certain amount that was just absolutely necessary for things to move forward. And really, I took my, you know, kind of pace from that season from, you know, Acts 6:4, where there was a busyness that was happening. There was neglecting of some of the needs that were happening in the early church, you know, the feeding of the widows. And so the disciples like came together and were like, hey, what can we do to delegate responsibility out so that we can focus on the highest leveraging tasks, which are prayer and ministry of the word in Acts 6:4. So with that, I mean, that's what I focused on. I was like, I'm just going to, you know, be praying for every student that's in our ministry. I'm going to be, you know, still preaching the word every week. And so the little time that I have, or the less time that I have, I'm going to focus on the vine work, so to speak, of, and then I had to delegate also. Like I was like the one-man show. Like I did all the announcements, I did all the slides, I did all the, you know, check-in stuff. Like we even had like a little snack bar that like I ran, and like, I mean, it was just like everything. Like I was just like, you know, going all around. And then in that season, I was like, I can't do all this auxiliary stuff, so I'm going to hand it off. And that's when we experienced a lot of growth. And so when it comes to, you know, ministries that aren't succeeding just because they have few people, I think that can be an excuse. But I think if you peel back the layers, sometimes you're like, dude, you're doing too much. You're doing too much to move this along, when I think if you really focused on, you know, prayer and ministry of the word, now, we still want to do the work, and, you know, like we still want to, you know, check on students, shepherd them, like, but that's more of like the prayer and the ministry of the word, like shepherding, discipling, challenging, you know, setting bold vision. All that stuff really helps to move things along. And so all that to say, I think some of the ministries that are short-staffed, or, you know, and they're like just throwing their hands up in the air, I think some of it might just be, what do you have to create a list? Like you have to create a list of things to stop doing yourself. And so if you wrote out a list of everything that you do in a week, and then evaluate it and think, what are the things on this list that only I can do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you would see that you have more time. Now, we've talked about this before, and it's funny because now we're starting to become known for this. But we don't believe in curriculum in the sense of like just farming out.
Yeah.
Excuse me. What we think is one of the most important edges you can have in your student ministry. And I'm not saying that you can never use curriculum, because like someone's like, oh yeah, it's forbidden to. It's like no, like we don't see that. It's just like you guys can do whatever you like, but we're just saying from our perspective.
I'm currently looking for a new believer follow-up guide to help assist what we're doing.
And so there's different seasons of, but I would say if you're short on time, don't take that out.
No,
like don't take the I'll just get curriculum so that I don't have to spend more time in the Word. And so we followed the like Ezra, I think it's 7:10, where it's like study, do, then teach. And that's that's the model that we've had for years as we've created our own curriculum, so to speak, of our own messages, our own sermon series, because we want to study God's Word. We want to do what it says ourselves, like internalize it, apply it to ourselves, and then teach it to students. And there's like a refresh. And we've used curriculum over the years for different seasons and different things. And when we have, it's like I just feel like I'm just handing something that someone else did to someone else and not really internalizing for myself, which gives me the ability to lead, when we lead by example. So all that to say, I would say if you're short on time and you're short on staff, still do, message prep and everything.
Yeah.
And there's, of course, lots of different things that you can use to help you with that to save time, or even developing systems to save time. But I would say, the things like, if you have a less polished program, but you're spending more time in the Word and like more time in prayer, then I think the Lord will honor that. Yeah. 100%. So, I mean, because I found that kids, they don't care as much about like having a PowerPoint game or like a, a clean youth room, like all that stuff. Like, yes, it's valuable. Like we want to have excellence in our ministry, but if you're short staffed, don't give away the ministry of the Word in prayer. So that's my take on it. We also have, I think there's been a trend for a long time. Like we're very activity driven in youth ministry. So like always coming up with games or activities or even outings and stuff. And you almost become like an event planner rather than, a shepherd or, teacher of the Word and a disciple maker, all these different things. So talk to someone who might be in that cycle of like, listen, I feel short staffed. I'm not getting the help that I need, but maybe they're doing all these outings and like planning all these different events for students. They're, making sure that like they have like different games and stuff in youth ministry. So like talk to someone that might be just on that hamster wheel of that kind of cycle.
Yeah, I had a conversation with, I had this exact conversation with a youth pastor about a year ago, and we sat down and just trying to encourage him. And I was like, dude, you're not an event planner. Like you're a youth pastor, and not like a demeaning way, but just an encouraging way. Because I think while we say we don't want to compete with the world, we're still kind of like, well, kids are going to practices all the time, and kids have all these, the clubs, and it's so frustrating because we can't get them to youth group. And it's like, well, then we're viewing the currency the world's way instead of the kingdom way. And the kingdom way is, look, what I win them with is what I win them to. And so Jesus, when he, called his disciples, go back and read. It wasn't, hey, do you want to have a fun time? Like, hey, do you want to eat great? Hey, do you want free stuff? And it was like, no, it's like, take up your cross and follow me. And I think a lot of times we think, well, kids aren't going to go for that. And I think our experience and a lot of the youth pastors that we're experiencing right now who are really experiencing kingdom growth, they're finding that's what they connect with in a sense that, look, they can get all the new latest stuff. They can get all these things. What they really want is truth. What they really want is a foundation. What they really want is God and Jesus. And so I think understanding that you have the answer that everybody is looking for, not because of anything we've done, but because of what God has done for us. For the first time, I would say, I mean, you can speak to this better than I can, but in the past generations, I think more than ever now, it's like you have the answer to everything that's going on. And so I think understanding that, it's like, look, if I get kids to an event, events are still great. We still all do events. But if I get kids to an event and I'm not sharing the gospel, then what's the purpose of the event? And so when you kind of run things, so like we've even thought about this, for instance, we do a big costume party. And it's like, how does
wait for that evil holiday?
Well, we won't talk about when it is, but it's like we do a costume party. I've even thought about this. It's like, okay, I'm gonna get up and present the gospel, and like some kid's gonna be dressed, in a costume. It's like, is that really what we're looking for? Now, it doesn't mean we don't do the costume part. It means I need to get creative of how do we make the gospel a part of this to where the gospel is the centerpiece. And when you do that,
object lesson time right here. I mean, you just got, what masks are you wearing?
There you go.
For the Lord.
We'll play that stained glass masquerade.
Yes.
But I think the thing I would kind of finish that thought with and kind of wrap that thought with is this: the more we focus on students making disciples, the less they care about what game we're playing. The less they care about what the next activity, because guess what? When that's the person who's investing in you spiritually, you just want to be around that person because that's who cares about you. And that's what we found is, even at camp this past year, is like, we just kind of did away with a lot of the activities, and we just kind of were like, let's just sit around a fire and like hang out together. And the kids really loved that. And guess what? They were asking questions. They're asking spiritual questions. One girl had a page and she's like, okay, hold on. So now we're sitting here. And so what we found is the kids care less and less about what game we're going when they understand more and more the mission that God has given them.
It's huge. Yeah. It reminds me, years ago, there was a really good friend of mine who visited a youth ministry that was like just exploding with growth, like new conversion growth. They were, not just transfer growth from other churches around them. And they visited this youth ministry, kind of evaluate like, what is going on here? And they talked to some leaders and they explained like, hey, we really believe we're trying to change the world. And so they went and attended one of their programs, and they noticed they walked in a youth room and there's like no ping pong tables. There's no foosball table. Like there's just, chairs and like a stage and stuff. And like, there wasn't any like fun activity games, like invisible side or whatever. So he gets there before, they started. And so he's like asking some students that are, meeting around or just kind of, in the meeting area. And he's like, so like, what's the deal here? Like what makes this youth ministry so great? He's like, and the kid with eyes, just like, we believe we can change the world. And he's like, yeah, but like, like a lot of other youth rooms have like ping pong tables. And he like stopped him right there. And he's like, ping pong doesn't change the world. I was like, man, that's intense. But like, they're right. Like, as far as like, what are we devoting the most time to? Are we just a social club? Are we just providing a safe place for kids to hang out? Like a rec center? Like, are we, or are we really gospel advancing ministries that are training students to be the Jesus that their friends need?
And if I can jump in, I think somebody listening might be like, well, hold on, my pastor kind of expects me to have these things. And I think that's why we're so passionate about measuring what we can kingdom-wise, because when you can say, hey, look, here's what God's doing, this is how many kids have trusted Christ, this is how many have been baptized, this is, then it's like, oh, well, this works. Like, okay, let's keep going. So I think I just want to interject and say the measurement in that sense is your friend. The more data you can have, we can't measure what God does.
Yeah, we can't see the hearts.
But we can measure what we can. And I think that's always helpful to have for that conversation of maybe that person who's listening goes, this all sounds great, but like, I'm still expected to fill the bulletin with like what activity is next and what we're doing next.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that we had in our notes, as we were preparing for this is, gospel advancing versus activity driven. And I think, some ministries, even if they're short staffed, they're not succeeding because they might be focusing on the wrong syllables, as they say. So like they're just emphasizing the wrong syllables, and like they're just maybe even just a few degrees off. But when you get down further, it's like miles apart.
And I think you actually have an advantage being short staffed in that sense of like, you have to focus on this. When you have all the resources, it gets easy to have vision drift. But when you're short staffed, it's like we only have enough time for one thing.
Exactly. And realistically, that's what I attribute a lot of the growth that I had in that season where I went back to part-time, was because I had to focus on the things that were going to matter the most when it came to spiritual impact. And so I think I heard recently, somebody that said that focus is basically the ability to say no to more things. And so, I think we have a focus problem in ministry in general. Like in America in general, like, in the world in general, I think like, digital, screens and stuff like just like really mess with our focus because there's so many different things that we could be doing and that we're distracted by. But, focus is basically just saying no to more and more things. And so evaluate those things. What can only I do? What do we need to have in our ministry in place that will further the kingdom, not just entertain more kids? And I think that might answer some of those questions of moving the ball further down the field at effectiveness, even with less. Lower budgets, less staff, less leaders, and I think people are doing more because look at the early church. They didn't have They didn't have budgets. They didn't have staff. They had just people that were.
Now, they would have loved to have them if they could have.
Yeah, exactly. So we say like, descriptive versus prescriptive. Like that doesn't mean that we had to sell our church building and never, have a church budget or anything. But they would have loved to have the technology that we have today. But when it comes to, they were able to accomplish so much more.
Absolutely.
Because they had a singular focus on the mission.
Yep.
So we also have leveraging student leaders. So one of the things that I promised myself, we had a youth pastor that just visited our youth ministry to kind of just check things out, and I met with him afterwards, and we were talking. So we have a middle school community that we have on Sunday mornings. That's it's where we teach middle schoolers, and then we have small group discussions at tables. So it's like a master teacher format. And almost 100% of our leaders for our middle school community are in high school. So like our high school leaders lead that ministry pretty much. They're the ones that lead the discussions. I provide the table guides or whatever that they ask questions, but they're the ones that are seen as the leader of those tables. And so anyways, with that, like, I've been shocked over the years, the more responsibility that I've given leaders, I've like very rarely been disappointed in their like ability to handle what I've given them. Like it is incredible. Like, and I almost want to test this theory. Like we're going to be testing this a lot more in the fall with some of the things that we're rolling out in both of our ministries, but where we're just really trying to see like what students are actually capable of. And I've not found the bottom of that yet.
Nope.
Like, we're like, oh my gosh, like you are killing this and doing really well. So I think we think that students aren't ready, but I'd say, ready, shoot, then aim when it comes to, and of course there's, wisdom in that as far as like, you don't want to put brand new believers in leadership positions, but figure out ways to leverage student leaders. And I think you can't go wrong with that as well. Yep. And then the last one we have was set and help others set realistic expectations. So, when it comes to even if there's pressure from senior leadership or parents, make sure that you're setting realistic, like, hey, this is what we're called to do. We want to care for them spiritually. We want to advance the gospel. We're not a social club. We're going to have fun. Like we're going to do fellowship. We're going to have ways for students to connect relationally, but that is not the end goal. Correct. We're connecting racially. You look at, Todd Peters, my boss, Navy SEAL, some of the closest people on the planet are people that have been in foxholes together and that have been in war together. Yep. It's like, it wasn't a social club. Like they didn't join Navy SEAL Team 6 or whatever to just make friends. Yeah. They did it to accomplish a mission, and they came out with lifelong friends.
Yep, absolutely.
And so when it comes to, setting students on a mission, it's going to make an impact on their relationships because they're all going to be common goal. So we can't, yes, friendships are a result of ministry, but we have to focus on the mission so that those relationships are guided through that. All right, so let's transition to some rapid fire questions. Yep. What are some best tips for recruiting leaders that you found?
Yeah.
Or are you going to ask me this one, or are we both answering
this one? We can both answer it. Okay. I've told you mine before, and you told me it was creepy, but watch them.
Just watch them with binoculars.
Yes. That's what
their house.
That's what I found works for me is just when somebody, I don't think there's anybody I've asked to participate in our ministry that hasn't been in our church longer than a year.
So define what you mean by watch.
Correct.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that like if somebody approaches me and has a heart for youth ministry, that I'm gonna be like, hold on, you haven't been here long enough. But I'm gonna slow play that. But I think by watching them, you learn if they're faithful or not. Like you can tell, for instance, like if they're on the welcome team, are they faithful with showing up in the welcome team? We never want to rob Peter to pay Paul, so don't just scout out the kids ministry and be like, who's coming every Sunday and let's take them. But hey, are they faithful? And if they have kids, are their kids faithfully attending youth ministry? Again, attendance doesn't equal godliness, but is it a priority to them? And I think the more you watch people, I think the more then you can speak into their lives with confidence and say, look, hey, I've told people this. I've been praying about you coming on board for the past year. Is that something you'd be interested in? That's a whole lot different than we need a spot to fill a small group. Would you be willing to do that? And so I think a lot of times this goes back to what we're talking about, where if you're in a deficit where you're constantly having to do all these things with youth group and you're not able to attend events and be a part of things and see kids ministry and see all these other things, then you're not going to be able to really see who God is using that maybe he has put on your heart to say, I want to call them to more. Would you help me do that?
Yeah. And the best predictor of future success is recent success. So if you're observing their life and they're living a godly example, they're showing up, they're serving, or they're just kind of known in your church for for being committed, then just kind of channeling that and saying, and then when you make that ask, what I found, so this is one of my tips, is one, I think having a bold vision that brings people out of the woodwork, where they're like, oh my gosh, I want to be a part of that. Like, I want to see what the Lord does, because that's like, and just say, hey, this is what we feel like the Lord is calling us to. Would you pray and consider it if the Lord wants you to join us?
Yep.
That is like the best way to instead of like, hey, we just need someone. Our ratios are down, so we just need another leader.
We need 1 to 8.
We just need 1 to 8 leaders. It's like, no, like personalize it to say, hey, I've been not watching you because that sounds weird, but like I've been praying that, like, for quality leaders, and your name has consistently popped up in my head, or people have been recommending you, or whatever. Yeah. But then to say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is what we're about. Would you pray and consider if the Lord wants you to be a part of this, because we would love to have you and try it out.
And then it puts the onus on them to see. You'll know if they're really wanting to be a part of it, because then they have to take some initiative. If you're just like, show up, I'll take care of everything, I found it to be more successful of like, okay, hey, well, why don't you pray about it and then get back with me? And that has kind of, there's been some people who haven't, but pretty much everybody who has been like, I think,
they're
confirmed.
Yeah.
So what about so we've talked about like tips for recruiting leaders. We touched on a little bit, but what about the biggest trait you look for in potential leaders?
I would say, humility can't be taught.
Yeah.
So humility, and not like insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about like humility in the worldly sense of just being like insecure about everything. Like, I'm just not good at anything. It's like, no, I'm talking like humility, like genuine, teachability, where, like I could have someone that has, and I've had leaders like this that are just amazingly talented. They're really, charismatic, or outgoing, like charismatic in the personality sense, not theological sense. And then we have lots of, great quality traits. Yeah. But I would say, hey, like, would you mind, like we're at camp right now, and the bathroom is just a mess in these cabins. Could you just go and clean the bathroom? And they're like, no, I would never do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, just the humility of like, no task is beneath me is like a huge quality that a lot of our leaders have. That's stay the longest. It's just like, I will serve it anyway, And of course they have different giftings that, like, of course they're going to be serving in, hopefully their gifting. But when it comes to, just that humility, like I'm not beneath, or I'm not above any task. Is it the other way around? I'm not beneath any task. No task is beneath me. No.
There you go.
Whatever.
That sounded good.
Yeah. Okay. Whatever. You guys know what I'm talking about. All right. So biggest trait I look for is humility, and of course, like, they love the Lord. Like, obviously that kind of character is not easily taught. Skills are always easy to teach.
Yeah.
Like how to lead a small group more efficiently, or how to talk to a student about certain topics that they're struggling with. You can teach all that stuff. Yeah. But when it comes to love for the Lord, it's not immediately taught. Yeah. How about you? Anything different?
No, that would be mine.
Copier.
So I don't want to, like, one of our statements at our church is prideful people don't belong in leadership. And, Christ humbled himself to the point of death on a cross. And so, I would 100% agree with that one.
Definitely. Okay. Let's go to some 1-minute questions as we finish up for today. So, Ryan, you have a timer ready? 1 minute?
Do now.
1 minute on the clock.
Yep.
And the question is for you, Ryan. What makes Christianity unique from all other religions?
Instead of focusing on how we get to God, the Bible focuses on how God gets to us. And so the whole story of Scripture is talking about how there was this promised Messiah, and that was fulfilled through Jesus, and he came down to earth. It says, that he laid aside what he had in Philippians, and it talks about that in Hebrews, we have a high priest who is able to sympathize with us. And so he came down to us to make a way where there was no way. And so this is more that when I talk to kids about why Christianity, like, out of all the religions, like, how can you be confident in this one? Well, when I look at all the religions, it's not an arrogant. It's just simply every other religion focuses on this is how we get to God. And the message of the Bible is you can never get to me on your own. And so this is why I came down to earth for you. And I think seeing it that way gives me more confidence that Christianity is true. So.
Amen. Excellent. That was 57 seconds?
Yes, it was. So, Keith, I'll put it there for you. All right. So that way you can see it.
Yeah.
You tend to perform better when you can actually see
that
the
is
time.
helpful to see the timer because,
Keith, this is one I get asked a lot. Will we recognize family members in heaven?
I do believe so. So we talked a little bit about this before, about how we might not be or have the need to be married in heaven, but I believe we'll be able to recognize, people that we've known in heaven. And this is, evidence through obviously like the transfiguration of Christ. Moses and Elijah were both made visible and they were recognizable even after death. You see in like Luke 16, where you have the rich man, Lazarus, and Abraham, they were recognizable after death. You have Saul, who recognized Samuel after that weird like witch of Endor experience where she summoned him back from the dead. Mm-hmm. And then you have David's young son who died. He even declared in 2 Samuel 12, he said, I will go to him, but he will not return to me. So that he believed that he would recognize his son in heaven. Mm-hmm. So yes, I do believe that when we get to heaven, we'll be able to recognize our Christian family members, friends, people that have gone before us.
Sweet. Look at you.
58 seconds.
Don't even have to edit them. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, that has been our episode for today. Why don't more ministries succeed when they're short-staffed? We covered some really important foci, plural of focus? Fungi. We covered a lot of stuff today that helps. Hopefully, Lord willing, will help you to succeed in ministry, even if you feel like you're short-staffed when it comes to adult leaders. If you've benefited from our content, we would the best way to thank us is to share this, interact with it on social media. If you're listening to this on podcast, of course, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you'll not miss future episodes. If you're watching this on YouTube, the vast majority, I think, of people that see our content on YouTube have not subscribed. So if that's you, we're talking directly to you right now. So make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. It just really helps people see it more. And then also, one of the best compliments you can give us is to share it with other people that need to hear some of the content that we're putting out. So thank you so much for your attention, and we'll see you on the next episode.